On a Sunday morning, church bells from St. Ignatius echoed through the autumn sky. After returning from church, our family was enjoying brunch at IHOP as usual. I smiled quietly to myself as I watched my son Ryan across the table, earnestly working his way through a mountain of pancakes. The sweet scent of maple syrup melted into the warm air. "Hey Ryan, your aunt's coming to watch your game next week," Rachel, my sister, said in an unusually bright voice. There was something artificial about it. Since her broken engagement 6 months ago, Rachel's smile had become somewhat strained, as if she were wearing a mask, having lost its former softness. "Really? Promise?" Ryan's eyes sparkled. "I'll hit a home run for you, Aunt Rachel." Brian, my husband, nodded with a warm gaze at our son, saying, "That's the spirit." On the table lay the church bulletin, with volunteer activities for Sunday school neatly written in. This Sunday morning time was precious to our family. But today, I felt somewhat uncomfortable. Outside the window, Newton streets, where leaves had begun to turn, were bathed in gentle autumn sunlight. The bustle of families gathering at the restaurant transformed Sunday morning into a special time. But my eyes couldn't help but worry about my sister's condition. Rachel had been saying she was immersed in her work as an art director at an advertising agency, but lately, her phone calls had drastically decreased. Calls that used to come 2 or 3 times a week had almost stopped this past month. She said it was because work was busy, but I felt there was more to it. Then suddenly, she called last night. The clock had already passed 9. "I want to take Ryan to school tomorrow." At this abrupt request, I was momentarily speechless. There was an urgency in Rachel's voice that wasn't usually there. It sounded as if she were being chased by something. "Yes, of course, that's fine." Though I answered that way, a vague anxiety spread through my chest. I thought I heard Rachel take a small breath on the other end of the phone. That evening, after returning from brunch, as the sun was setting behind the high-rise buildings of the Prudential Center, I gazed at my mother's memorial photograph. In the picture on the living room shelf, Mother wore her usual gentle smile. Next to the family photo taken on my wedding day sat the vase Mother had treasured. Every Sunday, Rachel and I would arrange flowers in it together. But today, Rachel had avoided it, saying she had urgent business. That night, I couldn't sleep. Outside the window, the autumn leaves announcing New England's fall swayed in the streetlight. From the next room came Ryan's sleeping breath. The sound that usually brought comfort felt strangely lonely tonight. As the clock struck midnight, I was drinking warm milk in the kitchen. Something was about to happen. I couldn't shake that premonition. The next morning, I woke before the alarm clock rang. Light filtering through the curtain gap brought morning's presence to the still dark living room. Boston autumn mornings are always a bit chilly. Wrapped in the warmth of central heating, I was reviewing materials for an important business meeting. Perhaps because of last night's nightmare, the text on the documents blurred before my eyes. I blinked several times and let out a deep sigh. "Good morning, Mom." Ryan came down the stairs and hugged me, his face still a bit sleepy. With his sports bag slung over his shoulder, he looked like a proper young boy. Still, the warmth I felt when I hugged him was that of a child who still needed my protection. As the sweet smell of waffles wafted through the air, I touched my son's soft hair. "Good morning. Aunt Rachel's taking you to school today." "I know. We talked on the phone yesterday." I froze for a moment at Ryan's words. I'd never heard that Rachel had called my son directly. Something like an alarm went off in my chest. "What did you talk about?" "It's a secret." My son ran into the kitchen with a mischievous smile. As I watched his back disappear, the anxiety in my chest grew a little larger. Outside the window, neighborhood children had already started lining up to wait for the school bus. Though usually a reassuring sight, this morning everything seemed slightly distorted. Brian picked up the newspaper and called out his usual, "Be careful today." My husband's calm voice brought a little peace to my heart. The morning sun streaming through the traditional lattice windows tinged the coffee cup on the kitchen table golden. But Rachel still hadn't come. The ticking of the clock seemed unusually loud. Finally, at 7:45, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there stood Rachel, wearing more makeup than usual. Heavy eyeshadow desperately tried to hide the dark circles under my sister's eyes. Her cheeks were unnaturally red. "I'm sorry I'm late." Her voice was somewhat strained. As soon as she entered the living room, Rachel rushed to Ryan. There was an urgency in her steps that I'd never seen before. "Ryan, can we make a little detour?" "Sure. But we can't be late for school." "Don't worry, I promise." Rachel's voice was trembling. Her hand on Ryan's shoulder also showed a slight tremor. I could clearly see her fingertips turning white in the entrance hall light. I tried to say something, but Rachel hastily took my son's hand and left the house saying, "We're off." The scent of her perfume was stronger than usual. As I watched them leave, last night's anxiety welled up again. I took out my smartphone to call Rachel. But I stopped myself immediately. "It's okay, surely it's okay." Telling myself this, I headed to the business meeting venue. The autumn sky was crystal clear, beautiful as if nothing would happen. The conference room at the Prudential Center. Through the large glass windows, Harvard University's campus was visible across the Charles River. The important business meeting with clients was progressing smoothly. The potted plant by the window basked in gentle filtered sunlight. In the midst of this, my cell phone suddenly rang. The ringtone echoed through the conference room, and everyone's eyes turned to me at once. It was from Newton Wellesley Hospital. "Mrs. Anderson." The nurse's voice seemed to come from far away. A sound like ringing in my ears echoed in my head. "Your son Ryan and Rachel Foster have been brought to the emergency room." At that moment, it felt like the world had stopped. My hand holding the cell phone trembled, and documents scattered on the floor. The white papers looked like falling leaves. Everyone in the conference room fell silent, noticing my distress. "I'll come right away." I stood up, not even sure if my voice was coming out. One of the client executives offered, "Let me arrange a car for you," but those words too seemed like distant noise. While waiting for the elevator, the sound of the second hand overlapped with my heartbeat. 10:45. As I rushed into the hospital emergency room, the electronic board caught my eye. The smell of disinfectant stung my nose, and somewhere I could hear the sound of dripping fluid. As I started to run toward the treatment room, a doctor in a white coat blocked my way. The fluorescent lighting made the doctor's expression appear even more severe. "Please wait. What's happening? Is my son all right? Please wait until the police arrive." The doctor's stern expression turned my anxiety into fear. The approaching sound of sirens strengthened the ominous premonition further. Footsteps echoing from down the hall sounded like the footsteps of fate. Police officers approached from down the hall. Their footsteps echoed with my heartbeat. What happened? Why the police? What did Rachel do? The dry air constricted my throat. As questions arose and disappeared one after another, I only remembered the promise we made in front of Mother's memorial photo. Mother's smile seemed to float before my eyes. "Let's support each other." Those words now stabbed painfully in my chest. Outside the window, Boston's autumn sky spread with its usual blueness. In the hospital waiting room, in the space surrounded by impersonal white walls, I trembled in my husband Brian's arms. The man in police uniform began speaking quietly. "The accident occurred on a back road in Chestnut Hill. The car carrying your child crashed into a guardrail." I felt Brian's body tense at those words. "Ryan, my son?" I desperately asked. "Your child escaped with minor bruises, thanks to wearing his seatbelt." At that moment, strength left my knees. "He's alive." Just knowing my son was safe made tears flow unstoppably. "Rachel, my sister." The police officer's expression clouded for a moment. "Miss Foster is in critical condition. She's been taken to the operating room." Then, for the first time, another police officer quietly spoke up. "Mrs. Anderson, what we're about to tell you might be somewhat difficult to hear." The female police officer's voice was full of gentleness. Her tone made me anticipate the worst. Just before the accident, Miss Foster was heading toward the state border. It appears she was attempting to abduct your child. The meaning of the words didn't register immediately. Abduct? Rachel? My son? There must be some mistake, Brian said in a low voice. There was anger mixed in his voice. Passports and cash were found in Miss Foster's car. Also, the navigation system was set to a route heading toward the Canadian border. The facts were gradually becoming clear. Each one stabbed my chest like a knife. Investigators are searching Miss Foster's home. There. The police officer paused once, then carefully continued. They found receipts for fertility treatments and psychiatric prescriptions. Also, a diary. At that moment, the treatment room door opened, and a small figure burst out. Ryan ran to me. Apart from a small bandage on his forehead, he was unharmed. When I hugged him tightly, my son said in a small voice, "Aunt Rachel was crying." Those words froze my heart. In the car, she kept apologizing, saying, "I'm sorry." The police officers quietly listened to my son's testimony. At first, she said she'd take me to an amusement park. But when we went in a different direction, I thought it was strange. Ryan's voice trembled. When I said, "I have to go to school," Aunt suddenly started crying. Just then, hurried footsteps were heard from down the hall. "Is anyone here for Rachel Foster?" It was news from the operating room. I tried to stand up, but my legs trembled too much to move. Brian supported my shoulder as we headed toward the doctor. Meanwhile, at Rachel's home, investigators were gathering pieces of her life. From the drawer, they found a bundle of receipts from a fertility clinic. The dates went back 2 years. Until just before her engagement was broken off, she had been secretly going to treatments. In the back of the desk drawer, several empty pill boxes were stacked. The prescription for antidepressants was dated right after the engagement was broken off. And in the diary found in the bottom drawer, on the last page was written in trembling letters. I can't get David's words out of my head. A woman who can't have children can't be a wife. But I have a child I love. Ryan. He is my. The text ended there. Rachel's former fiancé, David Martin, was also interviewed. In his luxury residential home, he spoke matter-of-factly. I determined she wasn't qualified to build a traditional family. At those words, the young female detective's expression hardened. I found out about the fertility treatments later too. She had kept it secret from me. This was a breach of trust. There was no sign of remorse in David's words. Rather, he seemed to believe his decision had been right. And at dusk, Rachel was brought out of the operating room. The doctor's expression was bright. "We've saved her life. Let's wait for her to regain consciousness." At those words, tears ran down my cheeks. She's alive. My sister is alive. Outside the window, the sun was setting. Orange light streamed into the hospital room, gently illuminating Rachel's pale face. Only the sound of the Ford dripping echoed in the quiet room. I took Rachel's hand and gently squeezed it. A faint warmth transmitted from her cold fingertips. "Mother, what should we do?" No answer came to the words I directed at the ceiling. Only the evening light reminded me of Mother's last words. "Always protect what's precious." At that moment, I thought I felt Rachel's fingertips move slightly. A week after the incident, at dusk, our family had gathered in the living room. Outside the window, maple leaves glowed like fire in the setting sun. On the table sat cooling coffee and untouched apple pie. The scent of pie baked using Mother's recipe wafted through the heavy air. Above the fireplace, an old pillar clock quietly marked time. Its sound was the only thing breaking the silence. "She should be prosecuted." Brian's voice broke the silence. My husband's expression had lost its usual gentleness. His clenched fist trembled slightly. This was attempted kidnapping. Even if she's my sister-in-law, she should face legal consequences. At those words, I closed my eyes. Legally, perhaps my husband was right. But in my memory, Mother's voice echoed. Family supports each other. Aunt Rachel isn't a bad person. Suddenly, Ryan's voice was heard. My son was curled up in the corner of the sofa, where he had been lost in thought since returning from school. His eyes looked straight at us. That day, Aunt kept crying. Saying, "Ryan, I'm sorry." Saying, "I wonder if I'm broken." At my son's words, the whole family caught their breath. The pure words of the 10-year-old boy pierced deeply into our hearts. His small shoulders trembled each time he remembered. "But, Dad." Brian quietly gazed at Ryan. Tears glistened faintly in his eyes. "You always taught me that if someone's in trouble, we should help them, right? We learned that at church too. The pastor said so in Sunday school last week too." At that moment, my husband's expression crumbled. He let out a deep sigh, then slowly stood up and took the family photo displayed above the fireplace. It was a photo taken last Christmas. Rachel was in it too. She had her hand on Ryan's shoulder, wearing a full smile. Back then, her fiancé David was still there too, showing what seemed like a happy smile. "What do you think?" Brian asked me. There was no longer anger in his voice. Instead, it was mixed with deep fatigue and sadness. "We can't judge until we've met with the psychiatrist." I carefully chose my words. Actually, yesterday, I had received a call from the hospital's social worker. They said an appointment had been arranged with Rachel's primary physician, Dr. Jennifer Brown. On the phone, the social worker had quietly added, "There is hope." The next day, in a room at Massachusetts General Hospital, we listened to Dr. Brown's explanation. Autumn sunlight streamed into the examination room, softly illuminating the doctor's white coat. "Ms. Foster is showing symptoms similar to severe postpartum depression." The middle-aged female doctor continued her explanation in a gentle tone. Rachel's medical chart lay open on the desk. The double trauma of failed fertility treatments and broken engagement drove her to the edge mentally. In particular, the heartless words from her former fiancé severely damaged her self-worth. "She bears deep wounds, as if her dignity as a woman and as a human being was denied." From the examination room window, yachts could be seen floating on the Charles River. White sails swayed in the autumn wind. The scene seemed somehow healing. However, what was most serious was that she couldn't ask anyone for help. Not even you, her sister. She was so cornered that she couldn't even confide her suffering to anyone. Those words constricted my chest. Though we met at church every week, I couldn't notice my sister's suffering. That fact tormented me. "What's the outlook for treatment?" Brian asked. His voice no longer held any trace of condemnation. Instead, it was mixed with deep concern and hope. "It's hopeful. She has strong resilience. And most importantly," the doctor looked at us. There was conviction in her eyes. "She has family support. This will be a great help in treatment." Actually, yesterday, she spoke up on her own for the first time. She said, "I'm sorry to my family." That afternoon, we visited Rachel's hospital room. She was quietly gazing out the window from her bed by the window. Bruises remained on her arm where the 4-needle was inserted. In the room's vase, autumn clematis gently swayed, arranged by the nurse. "Rachel." When I called out, my sister slowly turned around. Tears ran down her gaunt cheeks. Dark circles of fatigue remained prominent under her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm truly so sorry." A trembling voice. A pain-filled expression. But in her eyes, a faint light of hope dwelled. I felt I could see a glimpse of my sister as she used to be in the depths of her eyes. "Hey, Aunt Rachel." Ryan timidly approached the bed. He held a picture he had drawn. The drawing on the paper shone beautifully in the hospital room light. I drew it with a prayer. Rachel received the picture with trembling hands. Some warmth had returned to her fingertips. Ryan continued with a serious expression. Pure love overflowed in his eyes. "I pray that Aunt Rachel will smile again. Then we can go watch baseball together again." At those words, Rachel's dam broke. She began crying out loud. It was the sound of emotions that had been suppressed for so long suddenly flooding out. I embraced my sister. Her back was as thin as when she was young. The familiar scent of soap awakened memories. Brian also quietly sat beside the bed. His large hand was gently placed on Rachel's shoulder. "From now on, let's fight together. You don't have to bear this alone anymore." To my words, Rachel just nodded. That gesture hadn't changed at all since she was little. Outside the window, the evening sky was turning crimson. The light streaming into the hospital room gently enveloped our family. I felt a warmth as if Mother was watching over us. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, our family had gathered in front of the Christmas tree decorated in the living room. Outside the window, snow was quietly falling. The fireplace flame wrapped the entire room in warm light. "Aunt Rachel, look at this." Ryan proudly held up his report card. At the all A grades, Rachel broke into a full smile. Her smile had regained a natural warmth that wasn't there a year ago. "That's wonderful. But you have an even more important talent." Rachel looked up at the picture hanging on the wall. Ryan's prayers really did come true. I smiled, holding my coffee cup. A year's time had brought many changes to our family. After completing 6 months of inpatient treatment and being discharged, Rachel began studying to obtain her counselor certification. Though she continues weekly outpatient treatment, the sparkle has returned to her eyes. Especially when speaking at support groups for women in similar situations, Rachel's expression comes alive. Being able to share our suffering. That became my salvation. Rachel spoke these words at the support group's Christmas party. The participants quietly nodded at her words. Among them were women struggling with fertility treatments. Perhaps I was too caught up in the image of a perfect family. In front of the fireplace, Rachel continued while slowly roasting marshmallows. "But now I understand. It's okay for families to take different forms. What's important is caring for each other." Brian quietly nodded at those words too. My husband had actively engaged in discussions with the prosecution to minimize legal measures. The family's wish for Rachel's recovery ultimately influenced the judicial decision as well. "Melissa, do you remember?" Rachel suddenly asked me. "The words Mother taught us when we were children." "Ah, of course. Everyone sometimes loses their way. But what's important is not losing sight of the light." We said it together. At that moment, we sisters looked at each other and chuckled. Just then, the doorbell rang. "Ah, it's David." Ryan called out, peering out the window. Rachel's body tensed for a moment. Meeting her former fiancé was an unavoidable event. A week had passed since their chance encounter at the Prudential Center. But Rachel was calm. She quietly stood up and walked to the door. "Don't worry." Saying that to me, Rachel opened the door. There stood David with his new fiancée. "Merry Christmas." We were passing by. His voice no longer held its former arrogance. Instead, there was something apologetic in its tone. "Thank you. Merry Christmas to you both." Rachel's response was surprisingly composed. There was no longer any weakness of being trapped in the past. This is for you." David's fiancée held out a small package. "We've been attending the support group too. Your words really resonated with us." At those words, Rachel smiled gently. "Thank you. But I'm okay now. Because I have my real treasure." She glanced toward Ryan playing in the living room. After seeing them off, we gathered again in front of the fireplace. The star atop the tree cast a soft light. "Hey, Mother." In front of Mother's memorial photo displayed in the corner of the living room, Rachel quietly spoke. "I finally understand. Families don't always have to be perfect. Getting hurt, losing our way, but still being able to care for each other. That's what real bonds are." I embraced my sister's shoulders. Outside the window, snow continued to fall gently. The Christmas tree lights warmly enveloped our family. From the apple pie on the table wafted the scent of memories of Mother. This year's pie was baked together with Rachel. Surely Mother would be happy with its taste. Preparations for welcoming the new year quietly progressed. Family bonds may sometimes be hurt and waver, but they never disappear. That was the most important teaching we inherited from Mother.